Hello and welcome to the latest La Course on Tête podcast, made in partnership with our friends at Peloton Magazine, who asked us to welcome two new members to their Outside Plus membership family, the team at Cycling Tips and Pink Bike. And of course we said yes. We love everyone to be part of this family. So, with a hearty Belgian backslap and some Paolo, welcome to the podcast. I'm OJ Borg. As always, we welcome our Aérogramme subscribers for a podcast coming to you from the aftermath of the 2021 UCI Road World Champs in Leuven, Belgium. And the aftermath is completely what I mean here. I spent the weekend in Belgium. It was wonderful. What a week of racing it was. The Belgians were loud, they were excitable, welcoming, passionate, and profoundly drunk. So, to talk about what happened, to go through it, we have a man from his Pyrenean eyrie, that is Pete Cossins. Hello, Pete.
Hello, OJ.
Hi, and also from, who knows where he is, from a Bond-style lair in a volcano somewhere, it's Jeremy Whittle. Hello.
That bedroom, actually, but hello.
Is that what you call your Bond lair? What goes on in there? Sharks?
Not much. There's a circular pool and a rocket, but that's about it.
Yeah, and what will you do to Mr. Bond when he turns up?
I expect him to die.
There you go. So let's just start with what we thought of the week of the World Championships in the... what are we going to call this? The home of cycling? The heart of cycling, Pete? What would you call that neck of the woods, Flanders?
Yeah, it probably is. It's a heartland of cycling. Is it the home of cycling? Probably is, actually, given what we saw this weekend. I mean, it was pretty bonkers.
It's the football stadium of cycling, isn't it? Because every race that kind of in that part of Belgium and every race that kind of borders Belgium, like, Roubaix, which is coming this weekend, Paris-Roubaix, there's a real football ground atmosphere, which you don't get at other races, I think.
Tom Pidcock called it a stadium. He said it wasn't a road race, it was like racing around a stadium. And for me, it was the first time I'd ever seen any Belgian racing. I've been to Belgium in the past for different sporting events, and I've been to different road races. But for those who haven't been, Jeremy, it's a world apart. It is noisy, it's loud, it's passionate. The fans have got all sorts of things going on by the roadside, including all the beer you could ever carry.
It's just intense, isn't it? And there's that kind of atmosphere of frenzy. And even the police have this kind of look of like slight mania in their eyes. I remember the few times I've done the Tour of Flanders, the Belgian police always seem to just about have control of the crowds. And it's always very manic. And, it's just this real build-up to, and then release of energy and excitement about the race.
I'm a big fan of European police, by the way, because they always wear jaunty hats and have a Glock. It's a jaunty hat and Glock vibe. So let us start with the men's elite road race, won by Julian Alaphilippe, which I actually called for the first time ever, Pete. I actually said Julian Alaphilippe, and I nervously said that he was going to win the race, and he did.
You didn't have a hex on him this time?
No, I didn't. Somehow he did it.
It had to happen eventually, though, didn't it?
And it was an astonishing ride as well, wasn't it? Because... thinking back on it now, his coach, Thomas Verkler, said afterwards that when he famously pulled alongside Alaphilippe with, I think, maybe 30 kilometres to go, he just said, don't do any attacking, just kind of keep your powder dry, and we'll see what happens with Florian Seneschal in the sprint. Maybe you'll get And just Alaphilippe completely ignored all that, went bonkers in the last 20 kilometres and rode away from everybody and won in kind of the same style he did last year.
I think it's a great story. I think it's a great story, isn't it? Because it's that kind of thing that, it's a real throwback victory. It's that idea that you kind of really ignore, the best laid plans of mice and men, and you just go for it. And that's what Alaphilippe did. And I think some of the interviews afterwards, he was kind of even saying, I didn't really want to be world champion again because, it's quite a pressure on your shoulders, and it would have been a relief. He said words to the effect of it would have been a relief to have ended being world champion because I guess there's so much media interest in him, and he's expected to perform in every race he goes to. So it was kind of almost in spite of himself that he won. But you could see that once he started on that attack and once he got the gap, he wasn't going to back off.
No, and there was no radios because, you mentioned this when we were chatting about it earlier, Jeremy, that at one point somebody comes alongside him with a piece of paper and that's how he knew he was away and he had a gap.
Yeah, I love that. That was great. They didn't even have a blackboard. They had like the back of an old supermarket receipt and just scribbled the time on it with a biro. And you could see he was kind of straining, like, what? And then he just went for it again. And I think that kind of... almost amateurism of it was really great. And I do think that this idea of, I know people have talked a lot about radios and it's been talked about in the aftermath of this particular race as well. But, radios have their place, and maybe in the Tour de France where you've got huge crowds, you've got in the first week, especially as we saw this year, you've got lots of potential for crashes. They have their place. You do need to keep the riders as safe as you can. But in a race like this, that was, as Tom Pidcock said, effectively like being in a stadium on a circuit, you don't necessarily need them. And to have that element of spontaneity is just great.
I mean, talking of him riding through the stadium, Alaphilippe did say afterwards that people were trying to slow him down. They were doing the hand slowing down motion and shouting things at him, which I think were fairly rude. And I'm not going to say abusive, but I think rude, and throwing beer at him. Is that ever okay? I mean, because he said that spurred him on to victory. He was like, well, I'm angry now. Watch me win this. Is that ever okay?
I don't think so. I don't think it is it? I mean, you can't start chucking stuff at people. We've had this before with Chris Froome's been on the receiving end of worse things. But, I mean, you can't be doing that kind of thing, can you? I mean, I think one of the things that we all love about cycling is the fact that whoever's in the lead, I mean, most of the time you think, you want to see. I mean, people are partisan, but I don't think cycling fans are partisan like other fans are, and you're kind of happy for whoever wins in the end. I mean, it's great to see one of your home riders win or one of your favourite riders win, but I mean, Alaphilippe's ride was so astonishing. I think we were all really pleased to see him win, and to start chucking stuff at him or insulting him, I mean, that's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I mean, it is worth saying that when he came into the big fan square at the end, they were all cheering for him. I mean, this was uploaded to the internet. This is him on stage. Will, I'll get you the clip of this. It's the one where they're clapping their hands. So you can hear that the crowd were behind him. I think it was maybe just the heat of the moment, not saying that it was okay for what they did. The thing is, though, Jeremy, if you've grown up, if you're fairly newish to cycling, especially watching the World Championships, and you watch Tête Sagan, you would think, oh, it's super easy to retain your road world title jersey. But it's super rare, isn't it? Especially for a Frenchman. It's never happened before.
It is rare, yeah. And I mean, he's now joined an exclusive club of riders who won the jersey or who've retained the rainbow jersey as world champion, and they are Georges Ronst, Rick van Steenbergen and Rick van Looy from Belgium, Gianni Bugno and Paolo Bettini from Italy, and Tête Sagan, and that's a pretty exclusive club, and that's over 100 years. So it's very rare. It's very rare indeed, and I think again it shows that he was really underestimated both before the race and during the race, and with all that focus on Wout van Aert in Belgium. On Mathieu van der Poel from the Netherlands, it kind of almost felt like it was a stealth win. He ghosted in, and took the win, and it was just all the more impressive for that.
If you're Seneschal, can you be annoyed about it? Because if your team coach, your national team coach, Vauclair, said wait for the sprint, and then you've got a rider who doesn't, can you be annoyed about it?
I don't think you can, no, because I mean, we know Seneschal's quick in a sprint. We saw that at the Vuelta. He won a stage there, but I mean, this is something completely different. After 260 kilometres in an uphill sprint, you don't really know who's gonna go well. I mean, we saw in the race for second that Dylan van Baarle, I don't think anybody would rate as a fantastic sprinter, came through to get the silver medal in front of Michael Valgren. So I mean, it's unpredictable. And Alaphilippe was their leader. He was their best shot at winning the jersey. If they'd caught it, then Seneschal would have had his chance. And I'm sure that's what he was waiting for. But it didn't happen that way. And I think the other thing to say is the French team rode brilliantly all the way through. They made it hard for everybody. They went out with a strategy of they attacked from a long way out. They kept attacking. They used all of their guys. They had a very strong team, but they used them all extraordinarily well. And kind of they almost ended up with two cards to play at the end, which was to their credit. It just showed how well they did ride.
So are you saying the Belgians ruined it for themselves? Because they tried to make it hard. I mean, what was Remco doing going up the road with 180k to go?
That's a good question, isn't it? What was Remco doing? That's been the subject of debate all week in Belgium, hasn't it? I mean, it's still going on. Even now I've seen that he's kind of suggesting that he could have won the Worlds. He had the legs to win the Worlds. I've seen that he's liking texts that posts that Eddie Merckx is putting up on Twitter in obviously kind of advocating the fact that Van Aert was the favourite and that they should all have backed him. I mean, you can just see this massive split going on in the Belgian team. You kind of wonder in years to come, how's that going to play out? I mean, they could have won. Van Aert just didn't have a good day. That's what it came down to. And in the end, maybe it was because they didn't have the radios. They couldn't get that information across to people quick enough.
I mean, it does involve you talking, doesn't it, as a team? It's communication rather than waiting, Jeremy, for your sports director to say, attack now. It involves a conversation within the team.
Yeah, but don't you think this is the usual kind of like, the Belgian press have got pages and pages to fill in the aftermath of, the cycling highlight of the last kind of, decade or so in Belgium, the World Championships, and they want to drag this through over the coals over and over again. I mean, I think, they were under huge pressure, a home World Championships, and the favourite, the guy who everybody thought was going to win the rainbow jersey, didn't. So there's an inquest, but I don't know. I don't think there was that much of didn't feel like it was that much of a tactical catastrophe for them. It just feels like the strongest guy won the race. Nobody could respond, and that's how it goes.
I know. That's what made it so exciting. And I called it as well, which makes me happy. Now, the women's road race was similarly dramatic, with Marianne Vos fighting back tears on the podium after her team somehow, after getting it badly wrong at the Olympics, got it wrong again. She was beaten to the line by Elisa Balsamo, who at 23 adds this title to their junior title. She was beaten to the line by Elisa Balsamo, who at 23 adds this title to the junior title she won in 2016. It was a great sprint at the end, Pete, by Elisa. She was helped out by Longo Borghini. But the race itself wasn't the most exciting.
I mean, things were very much reversed this year. The men's race was, from a long way out, it was kind of gripping, and there was lots going on. The women's race just kind of built up steadily. I mean, the Dutch did try to break it apart, and other people did try and attack on the last lap. But essentially, they were riding for Marianne Vos all the way into the finish. And it just didn't work out for them. I mean, I think we all looked at it and thought, as they came up the hill to the line, Vos is just going to take this. And I mean, to Balsamo's huge credit, she looked like she was going to be overhauled. She kind of kicked again and went away and won. And it was a fantastic win for the Italians.
I mean, she's young, Jeremy, as well, very young. At 23, she's got the rainbow bands now. Doesn't ride for the most high profile of women's teams either.
No, but I mean, I don't. Is that young for a world champion? I mean,
I don't know. Well, the problem is, though, in the new world, what is old? I mean, the fact that we've got Tour de France winners who can still ride and win the young riders jersey means that everything's changed. Is it young?
I don't think so. I think it's great as well to see riders under 25 having this level of success. I get quite bored when it's kind of, the same riders year in, year out who enjoy success when they repeatedly win classics or world championships and into their 30s. I think it's really good to have a big churn of winners, which is what we seem to be having at the moment.
What was nice was seeing Balsamo's face at the end. I mean, the shock, the love, and what seemed like, Pete, genuine love between them as an Italian team, who overall have had a great World Championships.
Yeah, I mean, the whole team were astonishing, weren't they? And I think, Longo Borghini did such an amazing pull at that final climb. Despite the fact, I think at one point there were 5 Italians against 7 or 8 Dutch riders kind of coming into the finale. They all knew, the Italians all knew what they were riding for. They knew that they had real confidence in Balsamo, and although perhaps not many people shared that, they knew what they were doing. They all pulled in the right direction, and it worked out for them. And it was a fantastically good win.
You must have done interviews on this over the years. I mean, what is it like being somebody who turns up to a Road World Champs and you know you're just riding for a teammate? Because anyone who gets to the top level, we know it happens in trade teams, but people are paid a wage to do that. Everyone who gets to the top level has been successful in their own right. They've all wanted to be winners. They've just ended up in different roles. Is there ever bad grace? That as soon as you see it, that's why people don't win. So, I mean, I'm not explaining this particularly well. What I mean is there bad grace between the team in the sense that someone will turn up thinking they want to win it and they don't want to ride for someone else.
But isn't it a bit like, who sinks the winning putt in the Ryder Cup or something that? Whereby
but they're a team that all get success in the Ryder Cup. That's not the case. Only one person wears the rainbow bands.
That's true, but at the same time, I think if you've got any semblance of national pride or collaborative spirit and togetherness, then you're naturally going to be pleased when your country person wins.
Are you? I mean, has anyone ever told you that? Because there's national pride, but only it's not like the Italians have won the road race. It's not. One person's won it.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
She's just Italian.
No, but that's not the case, because I think, if you look at what's happening in Belgium now. There's been years when the Italians have got on the plane back home and they've all been slagging each other off and saying, "Oh, it's your fault we didn't win. It's your fault our brake didn't work. It's your fault our tactics were rubbish." There's been years when the French have been through that. I mean, in all sports we see that. In recent World Cups we've seen that as well with the French team. So these nations have their phases, don't they, where they're super successful and they're super together and motivated, and then they have phases when they kind of like badly managed and they fall apart. And at the moment, it looks like the Italians are on a cock a hoop at the moment.
Yeah. It's probably worth mentioning how teams get their numbers there, Pete, because you look at the Belgians, you look at the Dutch, they have these big teams, don't they? Tons and tons of riders in the elite road race. And then you look at other countries, the United Kingdom, for instance, or America, who don't have as many.
Yeah, I mean, it's all kind of down to the UCI points that nations have. I mean, they earn those through the riders of each nationality kind of totting up points through the season for their trade teams individually, and then there's a national ranking as well. And the teams that are at the very top of that ranking get in the men's race it was they got 8 riders. France got 9 because they had the defending champion, and then you get teams like Slovakia, for example. 3-time world champion Peter Sagan. I think he was the only Slovakian rider on the start line, and I mean, if it had gone to a bunch sprint and Sagan had been in the bunch, then he would have stood a chance. But of course, with all those breakaways, he can't mark them all on his own. So it is an odd race, and it kind of is skewed towards the bigger nations and against the smaller ones. And that's why you see France and Italy and the Dutch, the Belgians dominating the World Championships so often.
Has there ever been talk of changing that? Because it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair.
I don't know whether there has actually. I just think everybody accepts that that's the system. I mean, it's the same system for qualification for the Olympics on the track and in mountain biking. I guess it should be overhauled, but because it does shut out smaller nations.
Well, there you go. Overall, there were some exciting breakthrough performances at these Worlds as well. Neilson Powless, he continues his fast-track development. Zoe Baxter, who won the women's juniors, is that right?
She did, yeah. And she was second in the time trial as well.
Second in the time trial, won the women's junior race. Now, she is the daughter of a famous rider. Magnus Bagstedt has won tons, including Paris-Roubaix, which is just on our doorstep now. And he was super emotional when she won her title. This is him, who was supposed to be commentator at the time.
Who is going to make their move first? Fortune favours the brave here today in this one. Great Britain and the USA. The destiny awaits these 2 riders in the sprint. Kaya Schmidt, Zoe Baxter is going to be the first to make the move. Kaya Schmidt goes, Baxter responds. It's going to be quite a sprint between these 2. Schmidt and Baxter, they come to the line, through the line. Zoe Baxter is the world champion. Baxter takes the rainbow jersey, silver medal in the individual time trial. Kaya Schmidt takes silver.
And then the other performance that I would like to mention, because they were staying in the same hotel as me in Leuven in Belgium, is Eritrea. And Eritrea's Biniam Girmay becomes the first rider to ever medal from Eritrea. He's one of a few riders that have really come out of Africa and have been seen on the world stage. From Eritrea, it's just Daniel Tekle-Hymanot who rode at the World Tour level. How important, Jeremy, is his medal? Because he came from a long way back and he looks great.
Well, it's certainly good timing, isn't it? Because the UCI have just announced the first ever African World Championships in 2025 in Rwanda. So from that perspective, it seems like, the momentum now towards kind of black cyclists starting to break through onto the world scene and becoming more visible, all of which is massively overdue. It feels like that is building steadily, which is a really good thing.
You aren't particularly happy about the idea of the World Championships being in Rwanda, though, are you?
Well, I'm hesitant to weigh in on this because I've weighed in on kind of like racism in cycling in the past, and you get shot by both sides, which is the people who are anti-racist, and then the people who are saying, well, what would you suggest if you don't advocate, having something like a World Championships in Rwanda? Well, the reason I have doubts about Rwanda is because if you start researching into it, which I've done in recent months, and listening to other voices on the kind of the party line from the Rwandans themselves and from the UCI, there are some very concerning and disturbing reports of infringements of human rights emerging from Rwanda. And given that the UCI also have shot themselves in the foot with Turkmenistan and Belarus in recent times, the choice of Rwanda as a host of a World Championship seems well, at least worth a debate. And when I spoke to UCI President David Lepartien before these World Championships to ask him about Rwanda, he kind of waved those away. He didn't seem particularly well informed about the concerns over Rwanda and concerns over human rights. I mean, there's a major concerns. They're not just like minor concerns. They're the disappearance of journalists, political opponents. There's a lot of stuff that is very unnerving. So I think the UCI need to be a bit more. They need to do more due diligence. Put it that way.
Well, let's listen to what David Lepartien said to you when he spoke to Jeremy earlier this season.
Of course, I visited Rwanda twice. I met in May, at the beginning of May, with President Paul Kagame. I know there are some reports, but I can really tell you, a country that came from such a situation 25 years ago, and that is now able to bid for a World Championship, and with the full support of all the different communities, that's really great. Of course, in all the 206 countries in the world, you can find some points and you can be better. But however, when I see where they were, and where they are now, it's great. You know, there are solid foundations now in this country. I personally visited, the memorial of the genocide. It's really something difficult to see, and to see a country where the leadership has been strong enough to put people together, not to forget what happened, but to look at the future positively together. I think that's great. So I also believe that the President Kagame has also a vision for his country, a vision for Africa. He's one of the leaders in Africa. He has been president of the African Union. So yes, we are always careful with human rights, because our DNA in international federation is to carry the value of the Olympic movement, the peace, respect, human rights. But really, to have a World Championship in this country 31 years after a genocide is in itself potentially a success.
That's David Lepartien there.
So Pete, do you think, I mean, you've written extensively about sports washing in cycling. Do you think this is yet another example of that going on?
I think there's definitely a sense that that's going on. I mean, I'd agree with you, and you kind of looking both ways at the same time here. I mean, I'm really pleased that the championships are going to Rwanda, because when you look at the passion for cycling in Rwanda, when you watch the national tour there, I mean, it's astonishing the support it gets, and you kind of want to reward the people and the cyclists for that support of the sport and to kind of develop it. We all want to see new areas developing within the sport, but at the same time there are political issues there, like we've seen in other countries. And I mean, there are political issues also in the United Arab Emirates, who support one of the biggest World Tour teams, obviously with Tadej Pogačar as a team leader. Bahrain is another one. I mean, there are issues there, and I mean, Lepartien always kind of bats it away, saying, "Oh, sports and politics don't mix," which always makes me laugh a bit, because he's basically a professional politician from Brittany. He's a local mayor. He wants to be much more than the local mayor. He wants to be much higher in French political life. So I mean, sport and politics obviously do mix, because he's using his kind of status as the UCI president to kind of raise his own profile and climb political ladder. But who knows what the answer is in the long run. I mean, like I said, I'm pleased that the championships are going there. Maybe it'll help to shine a light on what's going on in Rwanda. Maybe it'll help bring about change. I mean, that's what people always say when championships go to these countries.
Does it ever, though? Does it ever? We've had Olympics in China, we've had football World Cups and Winter Olympics in Russia. Does anything ever change?
I don't think it will, but you always hope. But
I mean, my experience of going to the Beijing Olympics in China, and this is funny. It's funny. It's so frightening. So there was a newspaper journalist from the Guardian newspaper went to Tiananmen Square about 3 days after I got there and started interviewing people. The next morning we woke up and I was in the media accommodation right by the press centre at the Beijing Olympics. The next morning we woke up and went down to the press centre to start working. There was a tank parked outside. Didn't change a thing, did it? I mean, that's the thing. They can say, oh, sport brings people together, blah, blah, blah. But if you've got a regime that is hell-bent on oppression, is hell-bent on having fixed elections, under the guise of it being a democratic election, which is what some people are saying is happening in Rwanda, then, what's a bike race going to do?
Well, I mean, this is the point. And I'm sure between now and 2025, a lot will be written about this and a lot of people will try and change things. If it helps a ground... I mean, with anything, nothing's perfect in life. Nothing is perfect. I think we can all agree on that. If it doesn't change anything but inspires more African riders to take up cycling, we see more coming through at the top level. Would you then, in hindsight, Jeremy, say, well, maybe it was a good thing?
I mean, that's the difficult thing, isn't it? Because I guess that as a cycling journalist, on the one hand, I want to see the sport grow. I'm desperate to see a more diverse sport, more examples of riders from Africa succeeding and being hired by big teams. But at the same time, I don't want cycling to prop up a corrupt regime and an oppressive regime. So it's a very difficult and conflicting issue. But on balance, I think the UCI are not doing their due diligence. I think that David Leparte should sit down and address those issues more openly than he has done so far, which is basically he says, oh, well, they had a genocide and then it's a terrible thing and they've recovered and it's a message of hope. That's what he's saying. But it's not a message of hope if the regime that's replaced the regime that under which the genocide happened is a corrupt and oppressive regime. It's a message of, it's not a message of hope, certainly.
Well, I tell you what, let's revisit this entirely in a podcast in future. Let's look at politics and cycling and how they've gone together over the years. I do want to look at what's going to happen next year, though. 2022, the Cycling World Championships will be in Wollongong, Australia. They have a hard act to follow because I think we all agree that this has been a fabulous World Championships, that Leuven and Belgian and Flanders have absolutely nailed what it should be. It was loud, it was exciting, it was interesting, the racing was great as well. Sophie Smith, who's in Australia, locked down again, tells us now what Wollongong will be looking to do for 2022.
Holding the centenary edition of the Road World Championships in one of the sport's heartlands, Belgium, was genius. People are still talking about the reception from cycling fanatics that made the Flanders meet one for the ages. Wollongong has one tough act to follow when it hosts the world titles in Australia next year. It doesn't have Flandrian fans or cobbles, but the surf coast town south of Sydney makes up for that in natural beauty. The race routes are yet to be released, but I imagine the designs will maximise the potential for crosswinds off the Pacific Ocean. That is if the titles go ahead. And I hate to admit it, but with the way things currently are in Australia, I'm not convinced they will. The Tour Down Under, Cadel Evans Great Ocean Road Race and Herald Sun Tour have all been cancelled for a second consecutive year because of the nation's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and strict quarantine measures which at the moment require all incoming passengers to hotel quarantine for 2 weeks. And even then, freedom of movement still isn't guaranteed. I left quarantine after the Tour de France earlier this year and came back to a lockdown in Melbourne that this week is poised to become the world's longest. The government has made international and even domestic travel purposely hard and expensive to discourage movement. Authorities may soften quarantine rules, but there is no indication that they'll be fully lifted in 12 months' time, sadly. The cancellation of early season races shows few are keen on travelling 24 hours to then quarantine for 14 days at a personal cost of thousands with no guarantee of freedom to train thereafter. And that's for a stage race, let alone 1 day of competition. Hopefully, the Australian government catches up and Wollongong, or the Gong as it's known, gets its chance to follow up and maybe even show up Flanders.
Excitingly, we're on the doorstep of the first Paris-Roubaix for 2 years? It's also the first time ever there's been a women's race, the Paris-Roubaix Femme, which we're all very excited about. And Pete, the cobbles are great. You've written about it extensively. Is it your favourite monument?
No.
Oh, okay. Right. I thought it was.
No, I'd have to say the Tour of Flanders would be my favourite monument because because of the passion of the Belgian people and what it brings to the race. I mean, I do love Roubaix. I mean, it's the most exceptional race there is. I think when I wrote about it once, I said it's a bit like playing golf with hickory shafted clubs riding across the cobbles. You just think this is a complete throwback. Why would you do this? But it's just, I mean, it's riveting. I mean, you can't take your eyes off it at any time when you're watching Roubaix. I mean, we've got a situation this weekend where we're looking at probably the first time it's going to be wet at Roubaix since 2002. It looks like for the women's race on Saturday, we might have gales as well. I mean, they're going to have far worse conditions on Saturday than the men are on the Sunday, that's for sure. So, I mean, I'm already kind of just eager for it to get going, basically. I can't wait.
Do you think it will make the race more exciting? That the fact that it's going to be gaily and rainy or windy? Or is it literally, Jeremy, the person who can stay on their bike the longest? Or is that Roubaix in a nutshell?
Well, I mean, this will be really interesting, won't it? Because the men's professional peloton has obviously been racing over Roubaix for many years. So the sports directors, the riders, you know, some of the sports directors will be sitting in the team cars, have ridden Roubaix many times themselves. That will all be feeding into the knowledge of how to deal with extreme conditions. Now, in women's cycling, it's not the same. So they are really going into uncharted territory in many senses. And I think the women's race has the potential to be even more kind of grueling and brutal than the men's race, especially as Pete says, the forecast is pretty rubbish. Of course, everybody who watches it goes, "Oh, great, fantastic!" But I can assure you that riding the pavé in the wet and the dry, I've done both. Whether it's wet or dry, it's hell either way. But the wet, when you have to ride in the centre of the cobbles, because if it really rains, you cannot see where the potholes are on the gutter, so you have to ride on the ridge of the cobbles, which is like riding a greasy tightrope. You know, it's really unnerving and very, very frightening. And you have to ride fast as well. I mean, obviously there will be, but you have to ride as fast as you can, because otherwise the cobbles just shake the hell out of you. So, you know. But
you want it on
it's tough.
You want it on your palmares though, don't you? You want it on your palmares that you were the first woman to win Paris-Roubaix.
I think everybody, regardless of your gender, you want to win. If you're a pro, it's one of the top races that you want to win. It's so redolent with history of Northern Europe. You know, there's all the stuff about both world wars. You know, the cultural stuff about kind of edging nearer to the Belgian border at the finish. I think it's so atmospheric and so beautiful, and because of its brutality. And I didn't really get it until it stopped. When it didn't happen, I think I'd almost got a bit blasé about, it's Roubaix weekend, I'll kind of watch it in the afternoon, you know, and sometimes it was really gripping, sometimes it was a bit less gripping. But then when it didn't happen, I suddenly realised how much I missed it and how much of an institution it had become. Have
you got a shout for this weekend? Who's going to win the women's and the men's race?
I think it's a complete lottery. The women's race will be a complete lottery because mechanicals, teammates, weather, you know, it's going to be completely unpredictable. The men's race, I have a sneaking feeling that Peter Sagan is going to be up there again. I think he's due something major again. Just feels like he's been a bit quiet, and that's when I think, you know, you have to watch him. And he's got all the experience to deal with it. And there'll be a crop of riders who will be rated but won't have the experience. He's got the experience, so I think if it's bad weather, he could be the man.
You see, interesting. One thing that I picked up, kind of just going back to the difference between a wet and dry Roubaix, there was an interesting interview with Thierry Gouvenou, who's the race director, who's obviously race director at the Tour de France as well. And he actually rode the last wet Roubaix in 2002 and was finished 7th that year, and that was his best position in Roubaix. He rode it many times, and he was asked about what he felt was different, and he said, you've got to kind of ride not so much with power, which you can when it's dry, and just kind of power through all the sections. You've got to be good bike handler. You've got to be quite kind of supple on the pedals, I guess. And he just thought that maybe kind of the guys who can smash a big gear around wouldn't have such an advantage. I mean, we'll see whether the likes of Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert are just going to kind of pound away from everybody, or Peter Sagan, whoever it is, or whether somebody maybe a bit smaller, a bit more agile, like I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether Tom Pidcock's riding this weekend, but somebody who's kind of a bit more supple as a peddler might be.
Cyclocrossy. Are you going for cyclocrossy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think just someone who's kind of a better bike handler, who's just a bit more all round, rather than just sort of depending on pure power.
Yeah. Can you recce Paris-Roubaix? I mean, I know you can go and you can ride the Arenberg Trench, you can ride all these sections of Pavé. For the women's race, can you go there and recreate what it is like in the race?
I don't think you can. I don't think you can fabricate the mayhem and the atmosphere of the race itself. I mean, you see all these pictures in the days building up to the race itself of everybody kind of trundling over the pavé, having a chat, which is nothing like what it is in the race. I mean, I think they get a kind of handle for the extent of the vibration and the wobble that you get from the pavé just by doing that, but I don't think anything can replicate the real race atmosphere with fans at the roadside, and also the sheer panic. If you have a flat on one of the sections, you can just be standing there, as we've seen many times in the past, just be standing there with the wheel in the air, hoping for help from somebody for ages, and lose any hope of being a contender in at the death.
Do we know if the crowd's totally allowed, Pete, for this race?
I think so. As far as I know, they're allowed. Yeah, I mean that was the problem when that was the reason it was postponed back earlier in the year. And I mean certainly the COVID rates have dropped massively in France. I mean to the extent where they're even talking about not having people wearing masks in the street, which is still in some areas that's still required. So I mean I think it's. People can go. I mean, it looked like in Belgium there wasn't a mask in sight anywhere. I mean, in amongst the football size crowds that were there, and I don't think Roubaix will be any different.
Well, if you want to know more about the history of Roubaix, we made a fabulous special about it, which you can find via our earlier podcast. Just look at our stream, you'll find it back up there. It was a great thing, well worth listening to, especially if you love the whole idea of the cobbles and the history and everything we've talked about, this 100 years of the hell of the North. Also subscribe. Why not leave us a rating while you're there as well. So then let's finish by talking about women's cycling. And Patrick Lefevre has been on his high horse yet again, this time about women's racing. So far he's weighed in on mental health, domestic abuse and the value of women's racing. Who's left for him to offend? Who knows? What did he actually say, Jeremy? Because, I mean, really, well, what did he say before we talk about it?
Well, he equated he ham-fistedly yet again and very tactlessly and bluntly equated investing in women's cycling to supporting a charity. And he said he wouldn't be starting a women. He said he wouldn't. There was no way he would be starting a women's team because that was kind of his perception of it. And then he went on. I mean, he's carried on with his spade digging his hole, and went on about the quality of the riders, and if he saw women bike riders couldn't hold a candle to kind of men bike riders. It was just a car crash. And on the top of the things he said about Sam Bennett, which I always found ironic because when he championed Mark Cavendish, he'd gone on about how impressive it was that Mark Cavendish had overcome a bout of depression, what he described as clinical depression, and come back to the top of the split. When it came to Sam Bennett's mental health, he was pretty brutal about it. And then, of course, there was the other comments that he made about Sam Bennett going back to his former team from Deceuninck Quickstep as being like a woman returning to an environment of domestic abuse. Which I think if you put all that in, like you say, who's left?
No one,
Patrick.
But surely no one is this big a bell end, are they? Is it? Does he truly mean this, or is he saying it to be the most provocative man in cycling?
I think he delights in being unwoke, and I think he probably kind of sneers and scoffs at. I mean, he's a certain age of man, and I think in Belgium, maybe the culture's different from other countries in Europe and other countries in the world. I wouldn't say he's particularly woke in his attitudes, and definitely. I mean, the great thing I loved was that Lizzie Denyon responded to a question from our friend Johnny Long from Cycling Weekly, saying, "I'm pleased that Patrick has no interest in women's cycling because we have no interest in him either."
Yeah,
and I think
That's been echoed. A couple of people I spoke to over the weekend basically said something along the lines of, we'd rather people were like this, and if they have no interest in women's cycling, say it, be outright, rather than, pay lip service to it, start something, and then put no interest into it because you've only done it because you had to.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's true. I mean, every year, Team Sky got asked about it, especially when they had a female CEO in Fran Miller, and every year Dave Brailsford gets asked about when are Ineos going to set up a women's team, and every year he says, oh yeah, we're looking at it.
And that's it. Let's wrap up this podcast there. Thank you very much to Jeremy Whittle in his Bondler. Thank you, Jeremy.
Cheers.
Thank you. And also to Pete as well, up in the Pyrenees. Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, OJ.
And thank you to Sophie as well. Next up, Paris-Roubaix. We'll be back to do a wrap on what happened on the cobbles. We'll see you about there. As always, please do sign up, subscribe to the podcast. We love to see you here. And you can check out all the writing on lacourseontête.com. We'll see you after the mud. Goodbye.
Via, via, vieni via di qui. Niente più ti lega a questi luoghi, neanche questi fiori azzurri.